if you use R and are interested in GI science, Jakub probably requires absolutely no introduction. He's particularly active on Twitter, and yeah, I think everybody, or almost everybody, those who have seen use R have seen his book on geocomputation with R. But just as a sort of like formal introduction, we have here with us today Jakub Nowosad, who is an assistant professor of at the Institute of Geoecology and Geoinformation at the Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznan in Poland. His main research focuses on developing and applying spatial methods in understanding processes and patterns in the environment. He works in sort of like developing and collaborating in the use of geocomputational methods and software. As I mentioned, he's very, very active on Twitter, and you will find on our website, you will find a link to his Twitter account on the Eventbrite. So please do follow him. And again, probably most of you have heard about his geocomputation with our book. But today, Jakub will be talking about pattern-based spatial analysis and approach for discovering, describing, and studying geophysical pattern. Geographical patterns. What do I say? So I'm gonna leave the floor to Jakub now, and yeah, take it away.
Thank you a lot, Steph, and thank you, Andrea and Steph, for inviting me for this webinar series. I'm really honored to be here and to be able to share with you my work on pattern-based spatial analysis. So that's the work I've been doing for the last 4 years, or almost 5 years right now. And I should start by saying that that's not the work I'm doing alone. And this is all of the things I will show you in the next few minutes, was done and has been done with collaboration with other people in the space informatics lab, especially with Tom Stepinski, whose ideas and approach to spatial data will be very visible during this talk, but also other people like Jarosław Jasiewicz, Anna Dmowska, Paweł Nesel, or Jacek Nesterowicz. So I'm mostly interested in working with categorical rasters. So as we probably all of us know, we can see spatial patterns when we think about polygons and points and continuous rasters. But my work focuses mostly on categorical rasters. And when we think about spatial patterns and describing them and understanding them, we can often connect those patterns with some ecological or sociological or other processes. So we can see some examples of ecological processes when we connect spatial patterns to vulnerability of forests. We can connect spatial patterns with racial diversity and segregation, but also, in a sense, spatial patterns can be visible on the microscope images. And we can think about medical scanning and similar and approach of discovering patterns on those type of data. And because of that, there is a lot of effort has been put to quantify and describe spatial patterns. And there are many open source tools built for that, and I'm showing a few here. And they are found to be quite useful, and they help to discover many relations between spatial patterns, arrangements of objects in space with some environmental or other processes. However, so we can describe different properties of spatial data using those tools. So we can see a landscape, we can derive what's the connectivity on this landscape or what's the complexity of this landscape, but we still have some issues with thinking about spatial pattern in a consistent way and analyzing many different areas and many different patterns at the same time. So the whole concept of pattern-based spatial analysis is how to connect many different ideas into a large toolbox, large interconnected toolbox on how to not only describe a single area and its pattern, but also how to describe and analyze many areas or so-called landscape at the same time. And this opens a lot of new possibilities when we can search for similar patterns, we can detect changes in patterns, or we can group or regionalize similar patterns. And that's what I plan to show you today. And my idea is to start from the most basic ideas and expand on them with almost every slide. So let's start with this fairly simple categorical raster, which describes or shows us some local landscape. And we can look at this image, look at this data and describe it somehow. We can say that almost all of its area is covered by these green pixels, which represent forest. And we can say that yellow patches that we only have 1.3% of this area are related to agriculture. You can see also we have some other types, but they are just probably under 1%. We can also try to use some landscape metrics to describe this area. So I can say that this landscape or this area has quite low diversity because its entropy is only 0.1. And we can say that it's also medium, its clumpness, it's let's say medium with relative mutual information of 0.3. And the same idea now can be applied to many landscapes. So now let's move from one landscape that you can see here. So that's our example in the previous slide, and we can apply exactly the same idea to more landscape, more categorical raster data. And now we can say that for each raster, so the first one, second, and so forth, we can say what's the percentage of each category. So we can say that the first one has 99% of forest, while the last one is about 1/3 of area is covered by forest. We can do the same with landscape metrics. So for each of this area, we can derive some landscape metric, and you can see that basically the diversity in the first landscape is the lowest because it's mostly covered by forest, while the diversity of the last one is the largest because we have many different categories. So this way we can describe how diverse those landscapes are, and we can, in a sense, we can also order them by the level of diversity. Next, we can do the same with their clumpiness. We can describe and order them using relative mutual information and show that some of them have larger values like here or here. And you can see that we have a large patch of agriculture, large patch of forest versus some other areas.
I'm gonna just interrupt you for a second. I think the slides are gone. We can't see the slide anymore. If you can check. Apologies. Blackboard is what it is.
Yeah, of course. And right now?
Yeah, I think they're coming up. Yeah, perfect. Thanks.
Okay, so
Brilliant.
Just interrupt me again if something is done again. Okay, so going back, now we can see that some are more clumped, like number 12. We can see that we have large part of agriculture versus large part of forest, versus some which are quite disaggregated. So let's look, for example, at number 10. So we can see that we have patches of forest and patches of agriculture. And this way we can describe spatial patterns. And we can connect all of those ideas together to create this numerical description of every area that we want to analyze. However, we have some potential issues here. And the biggest potential issue is which metrics should we use? Because landscape metrics are, there are many landscape metrics, several hundreds of them, depending on the level. And also, many of them are intercorrelated. So how we should or which of them should we use in our work? And which of them describe the basic properties of spatial data? And in my work, I moved from those ideas of gathering different landscape metrics to a new approach, which I called spatial signatures. So a spatial signature is a vector of numbers describing basic properties of pattern. So now instead of calculating one number, we're calculating a vector of numbers, and we are trying to use some descriptions which are the most universal as possible. And the building block for this is called a co-occurrence matrix. And the abbreviation which I use is called COMA. So the co-occurrence matrix it's a matrix when we count how many cells of one category are adjacent to cells of other categories. And you can see that in our image, most cells are basically relation neighbors of forest to forest. And this way we can see it also on the image. But sometimes we have relations like agriculture to agriculture or agriculture to forest. So you can see that sometimes agriculture is adjacent to forest areas. But we don't have, for example, patterns where agriculture is adjacent to water. It never happens in this image. And why this representation or this way of describing pattern is useful? Because it contains two information. First information is about composition. So what are the categories we have here? And you can basically make a column sum or vector or row sum. So you can sum all of the values in the rows, and you will get how many agriculture or what's the percentage of agriculture, forest, grassland, and water in our area. But if you look at the matrix, you can see also what's the relation between them. And those numbers will be different for disaggregated versus aggregated landscapes. And next, when we have this kind of a matrix, we can convert that matrix into a vector. And so basically, I just flattened the matrix. So we have here a 4x4 matrix. So now I have a vector of 16 values. And this vector is called co-occurrence vector co. And next, we can simplify some of the things. Because, for example, here you can see that we count forest and by forest only in one cell, but we count agriculture versus forest here and agriculture versus forest here. That's why we basically can also get rid of those repetitions and just merge them together and divide by 2. And this way, we have even more simplified representation. And in this example, it only contains 10 values. And finally, the last step is to normalize this vector. So by normalizing this vector, we are changing it to sum to 1. So now we know that almost 98% of our pattern is the forest neighborhood, and so on and so on and so on. So this way we have very condensed information about the spatial patterns. So this area here, it has several thousands of pixels. But now we convert that to just 10 numbers. And this is important because we condense information. And of course, depending on the problem, we should decide how much we should condense the information. And the next step that we can do, we can repeat those calculations on many different areas. So on the left, you can see the co-occurrence vector, the normalized co-occurrence vector for this area, and on the right you have for the second area. So we could use those representations for every area that we want to study. And next, we can think of it as a histogram of values, as a density function in a sense. And because of that, we can use distance or dissimilarity measures to calculate how similar different areas are to each other. So in this example, I'm showing you Jason-Shannon distance, which basically calculates how similar this landscape or this area or actually the pattern of this area is to this area. And you can see the value of the distance is 0.07, which stands for quite similar. So 0 says that they are identical, so 0.06 stands that they are fairly similar because both are mostly covered by forest, and in both we also have a lot of agriculture. However, if I compare those two, so now we have two landscapes which are fairly different. So both have agriculture and forest, but in totally different proportions, and also spatial arrangement of those categories is different. And you can see the value of this Jensen-Shannon distance here is larger. And in the case here we have forest and agriculture, we also have forest and agriculture here. But in case if we have, for example, some other categories here, let's say like bare area and ice, and here we have forest and agriculture, the distance will be even larger. So this is one spatial signature. And that comma co-occurrence matrix works well when we have single categorical rasters. However, this idea can be extended to other types of data. So here we have two rasters of the same extent and resolution. The first one is again a categorical raster. So you can see we have values from 1 to 5. But also here we have secondary information, numerical raster with intensity of some values. And this intensity, it could be vegetation index, it could be number of people living in this cell, it could be anything we can put in the context of intensity. So this is again a co-occurrence matrix for this area. So we are just using this top raster here to calculate this one. And you can see again that the category number 2 is the most often next to other cells with category number 2. So the violet one, and that also makes sense when we look at that visually. But co-occurrence matrix has no idea about the second matrix, about the second raster. So we extended the co-occurrence matrix idea to create something which we called weighted co-occurrence matrix. And this basically counts how many neighbors each cell has here, but weighted by the intensity raster. And you can see that the values are different. So most often they are larger, like you can see here, but there are also some examples like 4 to 4 category, which now is the value in the weighted co-occurrence matrix is lower. And now we can again use the same idea. So the same idea about the measuring distances and calculating normalized representation is the same. So now I can firstly convert this this pair of rasters into a normalized vector. And next I can compare how this pair of rasters is similar to other pairs of rasters. And the last spatial signature I want to show you today is called an integrated co-occurrence matrix. So integrated co-occurrence matrix is the case when we have two categorical rasters. So now I have, for example, a land cover raster on the left and landform raster on the right. And I'm not only interested in the pattern in one, I'm interested in pattern in the first one, pattern in the second one, but also inter-pattern. So I want to know about the relations between those patterns. So what we can do here, again, we can extend idea of the co-occurrence matrix. And we can create some larger structure, which we exactly called an integrated co-occurrence matrix. And you can see I divided this integrated co-occurrence matrix into 4 sections. And basically those 4 sections are the co-occurrence matrix for the first raster, co-occurrence matrix for the second raster, and 2 collocated co-occurrence matrices. So this is a co-occurrence matrix when we count how many cells of, for example, forest are next to the mountains or are next to the plain areas here. And we do that land cover to landform and landform to land cover. And again, we can normalize and simplify that representation into a vector, which is called integrated co-occurrence vector. So now we know that we can describe spatial patterns using spatial signatures. And we also know that we can compare spatial signatures using distance measures. And because of that, we can do some relations to discover new things. One relation is one-to-many when we want to find similar patterns. Second relation is one-to-one when we compare the same area to the same area in different time to quantify change. And the last one is many-to-many when we compare many different areas with also many different areas to group them into similar spatial patterns. And now I want to show you examples of the process, how you can do that. So the first example is about finding similar spatial patterns. So let's say that we are working on this area. So this area is the Suwalski Landscape Park in northeast Poland. And basically the yellow colors are representing slopes, while the gray ones are representing the flat areas. So I converted elevation data into geomorphons, and geomorphons represent different forms of terrain. And now my goal is to find where else in Poland I can find similar spatial patterns of those geomorphons. So what I need to have? I also need to have my search space. So in this case, my search space is the data for the whole country, which is also data containing those geomorphons. And here, so this is the place where our query region is, and we want to look at our search space, and we want to find where we can find the most similar areas to our query region. So how we can do that? In our process contains just a few steps. So firstly, we need to divide our search space into some sub areas. And we can do that into a menu using many approaches. We can divide that, as I show you here, into regular rectangles, but we can also do that using some polygons or some other spatial data. Next, we should calculate spatial signature for our query region and for every region of those subspaces. And finally, we need to calculate distance measure between our query region and each of those sub-regions. And in this way, we basically calculate what's the similarity between our region, pattern of our region, versus pattern of other areas. And this is the result. So the brown color, the darkest brown color, shows you the most similar areas. And you can see that majority of them, and especially the darkest brown colors, are located in the northern Poland. And this is you can see that also some numbers, and I will show you some examples in a second. But this is the output, and we can see also that there are many dissimilar areas as well. And here you can look at the 9 most similar areas to our query region. So once more, that's our query region, and those are 9 sub-areas which are the most similar. And you can see that their patterns, spatial patterns, is very, very similar. So all of them have some flat areas, but mostly they have slopes and also some other geomorphons, and in the same time their patterns are very similar. So that's one example. Second example is how to quantify changes of spatial patterns. So when we think about changes, we often think about time, and that's exactly the case here. When we have two categorical data of land cover for the Amazon region, one is for the 1992 and the second one is for 2018. And you want to find what are the areas with the largest change in spatial patterns. So how we can do that? In this case, we are dividing both data sets into some sub areas, but now each sub area will have basically 2 rasters, one for 92, one for 2018, and we measure their spatial signatures, and next we calculate distances for them. And that's the output. And you can see that this time we are not interested in the most similar, because most similar means nothing changed, but we are interested in the least similar. We want to find areas with the largest distance. And you can see those yellow or bright green areas, mostly in the south or southeast of the Amazon region. And here I'm showing you some examples of those areas. So you can see that most of them represent the same process. So we can see that in 92 we have areas mostly covered by forest, while in 2018 those areas are vastly converted into agriculture land. And what's important here, and I should underline that, is that we are not only interested in how many cells change their value, but also if their pattern changed. So for example, if you have a case when we have half area of agriculture versus half of forest, and next time we have this half is forest and this is agriculture, the distance is 0. We care about the change in the whole area, not only of the change pixel by pixel. And the last example is example of clustering similar regions of area or areas with similar spatial patterns. And this example is a little bit more complex, because I am not only interested in just one data or one variable, I'm interested in 2 categorical rasters. So you can see on the left, I have land cover, on the right, I have the landform data, and I want to find areas which have not only similar land cover patterns, but also have similar landform patterns. So how can we do that? Again, we are dividing the space, calculating signatures for each smaller area. And next, for each smaller area, we have this signature, we have some numerical vector, and we can cluster that using many different techniques. And in this example, I'm using a distance matrix. So I'm creating a distance matrix. So I'm calculating what's the distance between each sub area to every other sub area. And finally, I can use some clustering method to group areas of similar spatial signatures together. And in this example, I used regular hierarchical clustering. And for this use case, I decided to make just 8 clusters. And I will show you that maybe in a second that maybe 8 clusters is not enough here. But for the example's sake, I decided on those 8 clusters. And you can see the result here on the right. So you can see that we've got 8 clusters, and some clusters are more aggregated. So here we can see this cluster number 4, the pink one, which is mostly in the Sahara region. And some forms belts, like the second one. You can see the belt here or a belt here. But some are more disaggregated and located in many places, like, for example, the number 6, the yellow one. And we can also merge similar clusters together and put those borders on top of our land cover and landform maps. And this helps us to visually see the results. And you can see that, for example, here we can see that we are catching similar spatial patterns. So we have patterns of some grassland with some, and we have patterns of bare areas, and we have patterns of agriculture, and patterns of forests, and so on and so on. But sometimes you can see, for example, here, that the Sahara Desert is divided into several regions. And just by looking at the land cover map, it doesn't make a lot of sense. However, let's look at the landform map. And now we probably can understand what's going on. We have different landforms located in this part of this area, and that's why we have a different cluster located in this place. Another example is here, when just using the data for a land cover, we would have probably just one cluster here, but we have different landforms, and therefore we have a new cluster here. So we can look at those maps and decide if they make sense or not, but we can also calculate some numerical metrics to evaluate quality of our clusterings. And there are several metrics. First one is called inhomogeneity, which basically says how consistent our pattern is internally. So if our pattern is consistent, then the homogeneity is low. And you can see that, for example, in Sahara Desert, this cluster number 4 is very consistent, while in some patterns like number 1 is very inconsistent. And also we can calculate distinction. So how much our cluster stand out from other clusters. And in this case, more or less, most of them stand out quite well, with, again, Sahara visibly with the largest value, because in this example, we want to have the largest distinction, but the lowest in homogeneity. And we can use those two values to calculate overall quality, which is 1 minus inhomogeneity divided by distinction. And you can see that the quality of some are quite low, but quality of some other is fairly good or very good. And finally, we can also try to evaluate homogeneity of patterns using our eyes, using visual assessment with so-called pattern mosaics. So pattern mosaics is a idea that we are random selecting areas of different clusters, or sorry, of one cluster, of a given cluster, and we are rearranging those random areas. So in this example, I took 100 random areas for cluster number 4 and rearrange them and visualize them. And you can see a pattern mosaic for the 4th cluster here. So the 4th cluster is the most homogeneous or the least inhomogeneous. And you can see that basically this random mosaic, so this is artificial random mosaic based on the real areas, is fairly simple and homogeneous for land cover, which is basically bare areas, and a little bit more complex, but still fairly homogeneous for landforms. However, when you look at pattern mosaic for the 1st cluster, you can see that inhomogeneity here and here is not very good. And that's probably a hint to us that maybe we should use a larger number of clusters to have a consistent, or to have clusters with consistent spatial patterns. So I hope that those ideas, this consistent set of ideas that we called pattern-based spatial analysis, can be applied to many different fields. And I'm showing you some examples. I'm showing here some examples of environmental work, but I also think that these ideas can be applied to also medical studies and social studies and demographic studies. And when we work on those kind of problems, we need to think about several issues, including, for example, what's the scale of the process we want to study? And in the same time, what's the size of the sub-areas that we want to divide our data into? How we should preprocess our data. So for example, if we have a land cover with 35 classes, but we are just interested in the fragmentation of forest, maybe we can just binarize this data, or maybe just use 5 land cover categories. Or what's the resolution we need, or what's the projection we should use? Next, what's the signature that we should apply? Are those signatures I showed you enough, or maybe you can think of a better signature? And finally, what's the distance measure for your signature? And there are also some general considerations or research questions that I have a good answers for yet, but I'm thinking right now on how to solve them. So how to try to more objectively decide on what's the valid scale. What's the workflow that we should do that? What are the type of signatures that are still missing and should be implemented or added? and what they should highlight. Also, how we can integrate not only categorical patterns but also continuous patterns in a consistent way. And also, what are the advantages and disadvantages of different distance measures? Because we have a lot of them, and this is an open question: which should we use? So, just to sum up, you can find the slides on my website, and all of those ideas I showed you today, I applied them using the R package called Motif, but also many of those ideas are implemented in a GIS module called GeoPath, and also a standalone software called GeoPath 2. And you can find some blog posts and all the materials that I prepared, which describe a lot of details and also shows a lot of examples of how you can work with this type of a data, and how you can think of using different parameters, using different data sets, and what are the questions you should ask yourself while applying this group of tools. And I hope that you will find these ideas regarding pattern-based analysis useful in your own work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you really, Jakub. It was an excellent, really most interesting talk. I don't know whether people want to just share an applause in the chat. I think this is one of the shortcomings of this kind of talks, that it's very difficult to show really the appreciation after the end of the talk, but I thought it was absolutely brilliant. If you do have questions, please do post them in the chat. Now all the thanks and congratulations are coming through, so maybe wait until those are gone before sort of asking your questions, so that I can keep it. While Jakub was talking, a number of questions came through. So we have probably, I mean, we have like about 15, maybe 10, 15 minutes per question, but we probably have already more questions that we can do with. So just for clarity again, please do post the questions that you have in the chat. So I will just start with a couple of questions that are more or less on the same, going more or less in the same direction, and maybe simpler questions and clarifications. So we had the question from Ivan, who asked how you define proximity between pixel, and do pixel with common corners count, for example. There was a question from Lewis, Joseph Lewis, who asked, could you please, could you base the adjacency window on a spatial dependence measurement, such as a variogram? And finally, more or less on the similar strand, Dave Unwin asked whether an hexagonal taxellation would not be would not benefit this overall approach. If you want to sort of like reply to one these questions, or sort of like more of a general conversation around this.
Yeah, of course. So regarding the neighborhood, or how we count them. So for those examples I showed you today, I just used four neighborhood. So I just count 4 nearest neighbors to calculate co-occurrence matrix. However, I am sure that in the software you can also use 8 neighborhood, and I'm not sure. I need to check that. But I think I also implemented every other neighborhood you want to apply. So you just need to specify a matrix of the neighborhood you want to use, and it should be possible. Of course, there is a question: which neighborhood is the best based on the case we have, and based on my experience, usually the 8th neighborhood is at least when we just think about rectangles, it's the best one. And I already saw that there is some comments about hexagonal neighborhoods and so on, and I totally agree. However, we need to think also about the input data we have. So if we have a data of, let's say, medium resolution, like a global land cover of 300 meters, and we want to convert that into hexagons, we will either lose some resolution or some quality, and we will, and also the calculation process probably would be longer. So it's in theory it's possible, and other neighborhood calculations and neighborhood ideas in theory are also valid, because in this talk I just show you the overall ideas, but if we just decide on using slightly different neighborhood, it's still fine. If we use a different spatial signature, it's still fine. If we use a different distance measure, it's still fine. But the whole concept and all of the workflows are still valid.
Thank you. And yeah, I think the last bit makes a lot of sense, in the sense that you can actually think about applying this even with vector data. I guess you would know the concept will still the same, maybe different implementation, but I guess you could do it easily with vector data at the end of the day. And I think there was a question from Stefano Romanelli, who asked how the extent of the chosen tile influence the spatial patterns, which I think goes a little bit in the same direction, but slightly different, thinking about more the outcome.
Yeah, that's one of the considerations I mentioned on one of the last slides, because that's a very good point. And again, you can think about trying to solve that in several different ways. So one approach would be to use some sliding window and to calculate this neighborhood not in the not overlapping rectangles, but in the sliding rectangles, and this way you can maybe detect some borders better. But second approach also, depending if you have like a high resolution data and you want to generalize this data a lot, you can create signatures for very small sub areas and next to cluster them. So if you clustered a lot of very small sub areas, you'll basically create regions of similar patterns, and this will help you to decide what's the actual size of the pattern you are studying. Because of course, the problem here is that spatial patterns are most of the time are not consistent in space. So when we have, let's say, this example of Africa, we have homogeneous simple patterns in Sahara, but we have homogeneous but complex patterns in the rainforest, and so on and so on. And this way, but we are analyzing the whole data in one size of the window. So of course, those are the two approaches I can think of right now: the sliding window one and the small one, and aggregate them to find that. Because there is definitely impact of decision about the size and the starting point of the sub areas or those local windows.
Okay, thank you very much. Great. Then we had a couple of, actually 3 questions from Gabriel Wurzer. So I will start with one which actually I was also going to ask. It interests me, and I think it was second by Anya. And the question is about how to generalize this approach. And the question is, how would the clustering component, which actually I think was really very interesting, how would the clustering work with a different amount of like multiple measures rather than just land cover and land form?
What do you mean about multiple measures?
If I understand the question correctly, I don't know whether Gabriel wants to sort of like explain that himself in the chat. I think what they are asking is if you, instead of having only one sort of like one data set that you use for clustering, could you use the clustering for multiple? So it's like, instead of like doing the analysis on one layer, doing it on multiple layers, like in 3 data sets instead of just 2. That's what Gabriel is saying.
So here today I showed you this simple co-occurrence matrix. So this is one layer basically. Weighted is one categorical, one numerical, but the integrated, I show you the simplest idea. So with integrated, I show you just 2 layers, categorical layers. But I haven't mentioned that, but the integrated co-occurrence matrix can be expanded to as many categorical rasters in theory as we want to have, because basically that it will grow. It will be a relation between, let's say, land cover versus landform versus soil category, and every relation between them. So of course it's possible as long as we are using categorical rasters.
Yeah, and I'm gonna take chair privileges and ask you sort of like a more computational question, which is strongly related to this. So we can, as you said, like even with the co-occurrence metric, we can actually, add as many layers as you want. But obviously the problem becomes that then the computation grows exponentially. How do you think? How scalable do you think the method is in this sense?
So maybe I should talk about 2 things. So one thing is about the computational thing and time of calculations and resources, but the first thing is maybe more scientific one, which is do a vector of few thousand values have any meaning or can be compared on a global scale. And often it's not the case. Often we probably shouldn't even do that, because if let's say we divide the whole globe into 10,000 sub areas, but our representation is 10,000 numbers long. It's basically N2P problem, and maybe that's not the best approach. Maybe it's better to firstly generalize the categories before even applying that, because otherwise we would get just spurious, probably spurious results, and or they will be not of any good quality. But regarding the computational part, the whole idea, I think it's actually made to be computationally fast, because let's think about it. We have these local areas which can be let's start even by 100 by 100 cells. So we have 10,000 cells, which is a lot, but we convert that to 10 numbers. So we are basically compressing spatial information, and I usually work on a global scale. When I start with data of, let's say, 8 billion cells, I divide them into, let's say, 100 local areas and calculate distances and so on. And usually the computational time, it's calculated in minutes on my quite old laptop. So I think this is the whole approach is actually aimed to be fast and to work on a really large data.
Brilliant, thank you so much. I think there is one more question which relates to how you do the calculation, and maybe more theoretical question. There are being many other questions, but I think we only have a couple of minutes left. So again, a question again from Joseph Lewis. Could you compare simulation of patterns versus the data using a sliding window? That way you could do something similar when you're doing point pattern analysis to test the model, the fit of the model.
Yeah, it's with those ideas, it's certainly possible, and we can also we can again, like I said before, we can do that. This sliding window, we can also try different approaches of simulating patterns and testing different distances and different signatures. So the R package motif I mentioned on the last slide, that's the package I developed mostly last year. And so this contains a lot, like I think 46 different distance measures. It contains like several spatial signatures. And I hope that it could be useful for other people to try this kind of research and try to discover how we can measure patterns in the way that it's as close to human perception as possible. And I hope that this tool would be would allow people to think about those ideas and try to solve them.
And thank you so much. I think this also answers a question from Alex, who was thinking about spotting anomalies and patterns in IT or log and monitoring data. So it's 1 o'clock now, so I'm gonna have to apologize to David Unwin, who was asking about statistical theory behind all of these and what is the significance of similar. I think we'll have to leave this for an offline discussion. If anybody has a few minutes more, and if Jakub has a few minutes more to have a chat, we can keep discussing. Otherwise, it's 1 o'clock. I thank you really everybody for coming, and thank you again, Jakub, for the fantastic talk.
Thank you a lot for inviting me. It was really a pleasure to be here, and I hope that people enjoy the ideas behind pattern-based analysis.
I really think so. This is being definitely the busiest talk that we had. It is being a record number of attendees. We reached over 90 people online at most points during your talk. So I think that was really being brilliant. And yeah, and obviously thanks to Andre as well, who's been organizing this along with me. Yeah.